Surprise! I'm here at the start of the video for once. In all my newly updated avatar glory. Well, I'm here at the start of the video in some of my earlier videos, but I try not to do that as much now because I don't want to interrupt people's viewing experience. But, unfortunately, this time around I do have to interrupt you guys for just a second, specifically because I want to talk about the character designs for this series. If you don't care about that, feel free to skip ahead to the story. I won't blame you. Also, just a quick note, I know I said that I am going to try to be more consistent and update videos more frequently, and I still am. This video just came out a bit later because I was still feeling a little burnt out and I decided to take a few days break from writing. I don't know if you guys know how much I write for these series, but for reference, I think the last 5 videos that I wrote combined total over 100 pages in length. So, hopefully you can see why I might need a few days off. But, with that said, let's get into things really quick. So when I talk about the character designs for this series, I want to specifically talk about how they looked the first episode of Arcane Fantasy, and why I wasn't exactly happy with it. Back when I made that video, I had spent a lot of time trying to find the icons that I wanted to use for Powder and Ekko respectively. Especially because Powder and Ekko in most of Arcane already have very distinctive designs that I was mostly planning on using later on in this series. For example, in most of Arcane, Ekko has an hourglass on his head, and Powder doesn't really exist anymore, because Powder is now Jinx. None of those design choices really fit in a story where they were basically just high school students before everything else was going on. You'd also honestly be surprised how difficult it was to find a proper picture of a young Peter Parker from the comics. At least one that looked modern enough to fit in with the art style of everybody else. So ultimately, what I ended up with were these 3. The main issue that I had with Powder and Ekko from these shots were that they looked a bit blurry. But there were other issues such as their designs not coming out very cleanly, and there was a good reason for that. The best shots I could find of their designs were from the dance scene of Arcane. A scene that I won't really spoil for people who haven't watched the series yet, although if you're here I imagine you have. But while these shots do come from an incredible scene, stills weren't really meant to be taken from them, and as a result for me they just ended up looking a little bit messy. Not to mention the fact that I had a bit of an issue with how these 3 look side by side, especially since they're the main characters of this series. Given that Arcane is a show that uses a lot of 3D art, it's pretty hard to fit them in with characters who are usually portrayed 2D, like Peter Parker. If you're someone who's seen any of my other videos, especially something like Omni Falls, you know that when art styles are a little too disparate for me, I try to make different art for certain characters using Canva. That way they seem a little bit more natural when side by side with each other, especially if they're characters like the main characters. And while for this series there are certain characters that I haven't redesigned and more than likely don't plan to, I am going to redesign at least Ekko and Powder for this series going forward. Or at least for this part. I plan to see how it goes here, and if it's a little bit too rough, then I'll probably go back to the original art styles. You wouldn't believe how long I had the original characters up in front of me for reference. It took a very long time to create this. And of course my artistic skill is very limited, so I was also limited in how well I could recreate the characters using Canva. But I actually think they came out pretty well, especially given my own artistic limitations, and I hope you guys like them too. I tried to keep the core of the characters as they were, but redesign them in a more casual way that really showed that they were just kids and they don't really have that much going on for them yet. I also tried to change their clothing a little bit so that they'd fit into a more regular interpretation of the world rather than the Arcane universe, which is pretty different than our own. Additionally, I'm changing the design that I use for Peter Parker from a comic interpretation to a slightly altered picture of the Spectacular Spider-Man. I think with the other 2 changes, changing this one just helps the characters all meld together a little bit more. So now when they're all side by side, they end up looking a lot more like this, which I actually think melds together pretty well. They all look like they belong in similar art styles. For me, when making videos like these, I like to make sure that there's not any big dissonance between the art. And for the most part there wasn't in the first Arcane Fantasy, but there was just enough to make me feel a little bit uncomfortable when I was presenting the story. And when my art more matches up to what I want to think about things as, it actually gives me a little bit more confidence when I'm working on things. So, I hope these design choices work out, and I hope you guys like the video. But I've bent your ear for long enough, so I'm gonna let you go. Without further ado, I present Arcane Fantasy, Episode 2. Peter's cell phone rang early in the morning. It had become something of a habit these days. He was expecting it, especially because he knew who was on the other end. He held the phone up to his ear. "Yeah, Powder, I'm still alive," he said. It had been under a week since he got out of the hospital, so he could somewhat understand the concern. But if anything, he was feeling better than ever. Even in talking to his friend right now, he was hanging upside down on the crane of an old construction site. He was a freaking superhero. Kind of. He really only figured out the sticky part. He kept breaking pretty much everything he owned with his strength. That was part of the reason he was out here, trying to figure out the limitations of whatever the heck that spider had done to him. "You don't have to be so grumpy about it." Powder's voice came from the other end. "Excuse me for being so grumpy. I only care about your well-being." Fine, I'm sorry," Peter said, pulling himself up from the banister he was hanging from. "What's going on?" "Nothing. Never mind, it's fine," Powder said, with a very clear grumpy undertone in her voice. A voice that told Peter that there was definitely something going on that was more than a little irritating to her. "Powder," Peter said in a warning tone. A tone that said he wasn't going to let it go anytime soon unless she spat it out. As much as she liked prying into other people's stuff, she hated it when they tried to pry into hers. "Oh, come on, Peter," Powder protested. You called me," Peter responded. He could practically hear Powder's body lock itself up on the other end of the phone. He waited patiently for a response that he knew would be coming sooner or later. As much as Powder might have pretended to hate talking about her feelings, she always relented. "Fine. It's a couple of things, but if you want to go with the biggest one, Ekko kind of won't talk to me right now." "Wait, seriously?" Peter asked. That didn't make much sense to him. If anything, those two were closer than the three of them were together, and they had all known each other for years. "Well, he answers my calls, but he hangs up pretty quick," Powder replied. "Well, we did just get out of the hospital, pal," Peter argued. "Which is why I need to talk to him. I need to make sure he's okay. You know, you're both treating this way too calmly. Everyone just keeps telling me to calm down over and over again." Peter could hear in her voice that she was starting to hyperventilate. So that was what this was about. The image of them both convulsing on the ground probably hadn't left her mind. She was at their sides during the accident, and she was at their sides when they were in their comas, even if they were only a few days long. It was probably pretty traumatic for her. Couldn't say he wasn't worried either. Sure, Ekko hadn't been avoiding his calls, but Peter came out of this pretty different. And he doubted that Ekko came out of it the same way, but it was always possible. "Look, Powder, I just want to make one thing as clear as I can. You don't have to worry about us," Peter said, trying to calm the girl down. "But," Peter said, preemptively cutting off the girl's objection, "if you want, I can give him a call. I can get him to meet up with the rest of us at the end of the day. Sound like a plan? We'll hash all this out then." Powder paused at the other end of the phone before she finally responded. "I really appreciate it, Peter." "Hey, what are friends for, right?" Peter responded, clicking his phone off. He let out a sigh as he opened his contacts. There was still nothing from Harry, which Peter thought was weird. He hadn't been hurt in the accident after all. His dad did tend to look at things a lot, so Peter decided to let it go for now. Even if in the moment it was kind of frustrating, he just wanted to see how his friend was. But dealing with his emotions about that wasn't going to help right now. He was trying to do a favor for Powder. He scrolled down to Ekko's contact information before looking down from the scaffolding he was on. It must have been easily a couple of 100 feet in the air. "Might want to get down from here first, Parker," he said to himself. Even though, in the moment, he didn't have the slightest idea how he was going to do that. Ekko Octavius woke up earlier in the morning than he had in the past few weeks. He snuck out of his room before his father even realized that he was awake, and he left the building before his first alarm even gone off. It felt weird to do, but right now it was no weirder than pretending everything was normal. Both his father and Powder kept asking him the same question over and over. Was he feeling better? Was everything okay? And he just felt like he had to say yes, because what else would he say? He finally made his way outside, onto the city streets outside his house. And while he was there, he looked around for something that he might be able to recognize distinctly. Waited until a bright yellow car passed him by. He focused on as much of the vehicle as he could, from the yellow color of it, to the tail light, to the license plate. He especially focused on that last aspect since no other car shared it. "It's gonna happen again. I just know it is," he said to himself as he felt his arm. He felt something bubbling up inside of him. Ever since the first time it happened on the car ride home from the hospital, it had happened every day since. He could almost predict it now. Over the first couple of days, he thought he was going crazy, but after seeing his dad serve him soup for 3 times in a row when he was on bed rest, he thought better of himself. Now he just needed to prove it. And he could. Right here, right now. Definitely. It wasn't deja vu, and he wasn't imagining things. So he waited, and waited, and nothing ended up happening. He scratched his head furiously, and for the briefest of moments his eyes blinked. When he opened them again, there the car was. It was almost outside of his eyeline, but it looked mostly the same. He narrowed his eyes at it and focused, comparing it to the car he had seen pass by previously, right down to the license plate, and his eyes widened when he saw the truth. Everything was the same, exactly the same. Son of a bitch, he said to himself. Sure, the car could have just made a crazy turn, it wasn't outside of the realm of possibility, but for a car to make a full loop like that should have at least taken a few minutes, and this had only been a few seconds. I figured it was actually happening, but damn, he said to himself, his mind still not sure what the next step was. He wanted to be a scientist when he was older. His dad was a scientist, and his friends wanted to be scientists too. So he figured in his mind he should at least try to apply the scientific method to all of this. Try to at least figure out the full extent of whatever was happening to him through more testing, but how was he gonna test this more? He supposed he could do something extremely stupid, like standing in front of a train or something and seeing if he went back in time, but that seemed unlikely. He did need to do something bigger than just standing around watching cars, but nowhere near that big. As his mind went deep in thought, he felt a buzz going off in his pocket. Ah, crap, Ekko muttered to himself. If it was his dad calling him, asking why he was out at who knew what hour of the day, then he was gonna have to figure out some kind of explanation. He answered before he even saw the caller ID, but he relaxed the second he heard someone's voice other than his father's on the phone. Oh shit, hey Pete. His voice came out more calm than he expected. Hey Ekko. Peter's voice came out. It sounded a bit more stiff than he was expecting. Well, the two of them had just gotten out of the hospital, he supposed, but still, Peter was usually the one that you couldn't get down. Do you have a second to talk? Peter asked. Sure, guess I'm not doing anything else. Now that's what I like to hear, Peter joked. It's about powder. Ekko listened patiently as Peter explained. He sighed more than a few times during the explanation. Of course Ekko was avoiding powder. He was avoiding everyone right now. If he wasn't, then he would end up talking to them about what was going on, and then they would think he was crazy. Of course, he ended up hanging out with Powder more often than he hung out with everybody else, so it made sense that she'd start feeling a bit neglected. Honestly, he kinda missed her, and he didn't love the idea that his absence was hurting her. Would have thought that stupid field trip could make his life such a nightmare. You can tell her I'll talk to her soon, Ekko said, his voice sounding very unsure of himself in the moment. Something that he knew Peter would pick up on, the second the sound left his lips. Ekko almost cursed himself when he said it, but to his surprise, Peter didn't say much of anything. Instead, he just kind of paused. Yeah, okay, Peter replied. As long as you're sure. He had the same hesitancy in his voice that Ekko had, down to the syllable, in fact. Was he going through something similar? He was involved in the accident too, but Ekko was the only one hit by that weird bolt of energy. He knew that for a fact, or he thought he did. Not that he thought about it, it was just what everybody else said. Are you sure you're okay, Peter? Ekko asked. But, yeah, man, I'm good, Peter replied, tone sounding mostly convincing. It's nothing to worry about. You sure? No weird deja vu feelings or anything? Ekko asked. It was probably the closest Ekko was going to come to outright asking Peter if the same thing was happening to him. He was fishing, waiting for a response. What? No, Peter replied. My life's just kinda weird at the moment, you know, with the accident and Harry still hasn't come to school, I guess. I mean, I am worried about him, you know? Ekko sighed. Even though he got the feeling that Peter wasn't telling him the full story, he'd definitely get on board with this line of reasoning. He was probably a little worried about Harry too, if he had to admit. Just going through some kind of checkups, I think. I mean, you met his dad, he could be a little over-precautious. Ekko said, his voice meeting nothing but silence on the other end. It's gonna be okay, Pete. Yeah, you're right, Peter responded. Ekko could practically hear the gears in Peter's mind moving. He always overthought. At this point, Ekko could tell he was overthinking things on the phone. It's gonna be okay, Peter repeated. Harry Osborn softly banged his head against the edge of the wall. He was supposed to be cleared yesterday. He was supposed to be cleared the day before, and the day before that. At this point, he was starting to think that his father didn't know what the word clear meant. He didn't feel any adverse side effects from the exposure to whatever happened to the other two. He hadn't had a seizure or anything, and yet he was still getting his blood drawn every day. "Oh, Harry," his father said, walking into the room. The tone indicated that he was somehow surprised to see Harry exactly where he left him. "Are you just about done?" his father asked. "Pretty much, Dad," Harry responded. "At this point, I'm pretty sure I have half the blood of a normal person." Harry flexed his hand. "They'll be making documentaries about me soon enough." "I'd hope not. It would be a pretty boring documentary." His father smiled. "They don't make documentaries about normal school kids, do they?" "Well, I'm not exactly going to school, am I?" Harry replied dryly. "Yes, I was meaning to ask about that. Why aren't you ready for school?" his father asked, pretending to be absent-minded. Harry opened his mouth in confusion for half a second before noticing that his father was holding his backpack. "Wait, seriously?" Harry asked. "But..." "You didn't expect to be here forever, did you? We just needed to make double sure the labs came back clear." His dad smiled. "A little extra caution goes a long way after all. But not long enough to keep you from any more homework." He nudged his son, who hugged him very tightly. His dad made the same fake grunting sound that he always did whenever Harry hugged him. "Ugh, you might be getting a bit too strong to keep doing this, you know. An old man's back can't take that much." He smiled, patting his son on the back. He waved him off to the front entrance of the apartment, barely getting a goodbye out of the boy before he rushed out the door. He was happy for him in the moment, but he moved on pretty quickly. He glanced up at a screen that brought up a picture of his subordinate's face. "Oh, Mr. Tallis," he said, looking at his secondary scientist at Oscorp, a man directly below Otto Octavius in terms of rank and intelligence. The man that he had sent his blood results to. At least the results from his and Mr. Octavius' son. Peter Parker himself was a different story. He didn't have any Oscorp employees within Mr. Parker's family to get the blood samples after all. He was gonna have to come up with a reason to ask him to come in for some testing to make sure he was okay. Perhaps, he thought, he could offer him a bit of monetary compensation. He knew from paying Peter Parker's medical bills that his family wasn't in the best financial situation. A thought that he filed in the back of his head for later. "Yes, Mr. Osborn," Jace Tallis replied. "What did you find?" Norman's voice asked. That was the entire sentence. A few measly words, but they had a tremendous amount of weight carried with them, especially given the fact that he had given his own son's blood over to this man. If it turned out there was truly nothing to this, then fine. But the preliminary look into his son's blood test told him otherwise. "A great deal, sir," Jace responded, clearing his throat. A renewed surge of energy pushed him through the moment. This could be the breakthrough of the century. Just imagining any of this applying to medicine or... "Mr. Tallis," Norman's voice cut him off. "Right, sorry, sir." Jace straightened himself up. "Allow me to pull up a diagram for you." As he spoke, a model of human blood cells appeared directly before him. "This is what your son's blood cells looked like last time you had them examined for his regular physical." He swiped away at the screen. "And this is what his blood cells look like now." The bloodstream looked mostly the same, except for the red blood cells being darker. Just a couple of shades, and there seemed to be some kind of microscopic dots alongside the blood cells. Dots that were completely black. Some of them were circling around the cells the way that planets orbited stars. "What am I looking at here?" Norman asked. "Not much, sir. Your son should be fine. In fact, we expect this to go away fairly soon, but... It would appear that the explosion that was caused in the lab somehow pushed the remnants of the Oz formula into your son. If I had to guess, I'd say that somehow, due to the fact that the spider was there that was treated with the Oz formula, it could have somehow excreted something into the air that was injected into Harry when the blast went off. It would have had to have been transmitted through the air. But this does seem unlikely. I'd wager to say nearly impossible, but it's one of the only culprits we could think of." Norman let the new information push past him. His son would be fine. That was the first piece of information that he absorbed. But the implications of the news he had just gotten were interesting, if not astounding. The Oz serum was meant to be directly injected into a person, and even then there was no guarantee it would work. For example, the spider, aside from its partial aggression, was relatively normal. It was the only living being they had ever treated with the Oz serum, though. "What of Mr. Octavius' son?" Norman asked. "Well, that's where things get interesting, sir." Jace continued onwards. Another screen pulled up. Again, it looked mostly normal. Mr. Octavius managed to get 2 samples for us. They were roughly 2 hours apart. So this is what the first one looked like, and this was what the second one looked like. He changed the slide again, showing a pretty normal image of blood. In fact, there was nothing that Norman could see about it that was out of the ordinary in any way. So there's no change, Norman said. He didn't know whether he should feel happy or disappointed, though now that he thought about it, not permanently mutating his son's friend was a cause for celebration. Actually, the fact that nothing's out of the ordinary is the problem, Jace continued. We've gotten very good at learning about biometric data, thanks to advancements in technology made by Stark Industries and the Capsule Corporation, and as a result, we've gotten very good at telling how old a person is. Exactly. We've gotten so good at it, we can nearly tell down to the hour. And the secondary blood sample was younger than the first one. By about 3 hours, sir. That sounds like it could be a simple mistake. It could have been submitted out of order, or... No, sir, I'm afraid that's not possible. Jace cut in again. Do you see this here? Another image popped up on the screen. It was the blood still in his vein. The syringes that you asked Mr. Osborn to take the blood with were Oscorp property, meaning that they were equipped with microcameras. I am aware of our own technology, Mr. Tellis. Wait, of course you are, sir, Jace said nervously. If he was able to get Mr. Osborn's attention here, he might be able to look into this further. This could be a legitimate advancement that could boost mankind's physical prowess for decades. He needed to make sure Mr. Osborn knew just what a big deal this was. If I might direct your attention here to this darker spot. Norman indeed did focus his eyes on that spot. It didn't look like anything, just a small speck on the blood vessel. This is the spot where Mr. Octavius made his previous blood draw. As you can see, it's already begun to heal, which means that the blood in this sample is indeed from after, meaning that his blood cells are moving almost asynchronously to the rest of his body somehow. Like he's interacting with time differently, Norman Osborn realized, finally catching up to Jace's hypothesis. He knew there were people in the world who interacted with time in strange ways. After all, speedsters like the Flash existed. But for something like this to come from his experiment, he hadn't been expecting it. The drive that he built was just meant to map extra-dimensional space. Thought for a moment. The fourth dimension was time, or rather the concept of space-time. If he hadn't just managed to map out space-time but rather interact with it, then maybe the young man who had interacted with his power source had somehow formed a connection with space-time itself. If he remembered correctly, one of the components in the machine was dark matter, as in the same dark matter that activated the metagene and created metahumans. He paused for a moment. Were you able to find the metagene in Mr. Ekko's DNA? Finally asked. It doesn't look like it, sir. If something did happen to him, it doesn't appear to be meta-related. Jace responded. That was particularly what got him so interested in this. Metahumans and mutants were the people who gained powers in this world. The people who the laws of nature kind of seemed to ignore. The true evolutions of humanity. Sure, there were exceptions here or there, people like Bruce Banner, but these people were moving along that path in gigantic numbers. Scientific treatments to grant people powers barely worked, if ever. The last one that had publicly worked hadn't happened since the 1940s. So if they had managed to do something like this, something incredible, then he knew that they couldn't let go of it. Then it looks like we'll have to keep moving forward, won't we? Norman responded. Now he was definitely gonna have to give Parker a call. Things were getting more and more fascinating by the second. He might have been at the forefront of a real technological and biological innovation, something that the world probably wouldn't see without him. He let himself smile in the moment as he walked out of the room. In the back of a lab, Reed Richards sat. He had taken the better part of a day to quite literally pull himself back together. His body kept tearing itself apart by the second. And if he didn't want to be a pile of human goo on the ground, he had to constantly focus on keeping his human form. From the looks of things, the others weren't much better. He wasn't able to go into their rooms to meet with them. Apparently, since they didn't know how they had gotten their powers in the first place, everybody had concerns about how their powers might interact if they shared space, especially with all of them not really knowing what kind of energy was coming off of them. So, Reed had kept himself busy by trying to disprove everybody's concerns. Meaning he had to look at everybody's data, meaning he had to look at their cameras. So he had to watch. He had to watch as the love of his life struggled to maintain her visibility. He had to keep watching the humanity in front of her disappear piece by piece, only to reappear for brief glimpses to give her false hope. He hadn't even been able to see her reflection in days. The psychological toll must have been enormous. Her younger brother had barely managed to keep from burning out all the oxygen in the room. There were several moments when he had nearly passed out, and that was with a whole team of people keeping an eye on his vitals at every waking second. Thankfully, Johnny seemed to be treating everything a lot more like a joke than anything else. It kept his spirits up, even when he flickered on and off, for hours or hours on end. But the worst was definitely Ben. Ben had always been the foundation of Reed's life since they were children. Reed's father had done a great job of piquing his scientific curiosity, but Ben always encouraged Reed to go further. Before the accident, Ben had indulged his scientific curiosity every day, but he also made sure that Reed had normal people fun, things that just kept him grounded, kept him human. Reed was very sure that without Ben Grimm, he would have grown up to be a very different person. He would have grown up to be lost, but right now, Ben himself was lost. Every day since the incident, Ben had just stared at his rocky texture. Reed managed to pull himself together enough to at least look human. Susan had moments of visibility, when her powers were off and she was able to see herself in the mirror. And Johnny had moments when his powers burned up so brightly that they just turned off, allowing him to see himself clearly. Heck, even when he was on fire, he still had the silhouette of a real person. But Ben looked more like the Hulk if the Hulk somehow had a crab skeleton etched to his body. Ben still had a humanoid shape, but any semblance of the figure that he had before was gone in an instant. The first day, Ben was just angry. The second, he was screaming, wanting to know where his friends were. The third, he was crying out for Reed, begging for the help of one of the smartest people on the planet. That day was particularly difficult for Reed Richards. But what followed through basically fractured his heart in two. It was the silence that now hung through the air when he looked at Ben's camera. Ben hadn't spoken in days. He was just silent, completely, huddled in the corner of his steel cell. And these people were supposed to be helping them? The four of them had gone into space as part of a government project. The least the government could do was provide Reed with a lab. He knew for a fact that nobody who was supposedly working on the solution was as smart as he was. He could do a better job than them with his hand tied behind his back. And to add insult to injury, none of them would tell him a single thing about Victor Von Doom. Victor had been there with Reed when he was designing this. He knew that for a fact, in his heart, none of his calculations could have led to this outcome. He must have checked over the initial data a dozen times, and he checked over it a dozen times since. None of the data made sense. None of his math worked out to this. It had to be Victor. It had to be. But he disappeared into the wind. Finally, after he thought he couldn't take it anymore, somebody else stepped in. It was one of the scientists who had been working on him. He'd had seen him a few times. The man dropped what appeared to be a skin-tight suit at Reed's feet. "We took most of your design details into consideration, Mr. Richards. We even managed to outsource to make sure we got everything right. Both Tony Stark and Boma Briefs gave us the go-ahead." Reed looked down at it. It was his environment suit, the suit he designed to theoretically keep any excess radiation off of him. Something that Reed had designed as a challenge when he had first heard of the Incredible Hulk. But when this happened to them, he decided to rework things a little bit. And thankfully, two of the greatest scientific minds in the world, aside from himself of course, were giving him the go-ahead. Which meant at the very least he was right about the basic premise. He slipped the suit on, and almost immediately a lot of the pressure that went into maintaining his current human form were off. The suit was cutting his powers off from moving in too far of extremes. He could walk on two legs without collapsing into a pile of spaghetti if he lost focus. That was a good start. "Did you give them to the others?" Reed asked. He got a firm nod from the person standing in front of him. "Does that mean I can see them? The suit should keep any excess radiation from affecting us, or any of you." Again, he got a nod, and he breathed out a sigh of relief. The first thing was first. He needed to reunite with his family. But after that, he was going to get to work on tracking down Victor. The quickest way to fix the situation would be to find out what he broke. And Reed had a few choice words for him once they were finally reunited. After the final bell rung, Powder felt pretty good about herself. It was like the most awful time of her life had finally blown over. Sure, her friends had been dodging her calls for a while. And sure, they still refused to talk about how they were feeling after everything went down, something that was still pressing down on her mind by the absolute second. But now, with school over, both Peter and Ekko were walking by her side. Peter was right. Ekko agreed to meet up with everybody. She was half sure that Peter had guilted Ekko into it, but honestly right now she didn't really care. It felt like a gigantic weight was lifted off her chest just from seeing those two in the same place as her. Heck, the stars really aligned and she even saw Harry today. He showed up maybe halfway through the day, but still, it was nice to see him again. And it seemed to make Peter a heck of a lot more relieved. It was just nice to talk to people without the weight of the world on her chest, especially because things at home weren't exactly the best right now. If her sisters were worried about going on missions with her before her friends got into their accidents, now they were treating her like she was made of glass. At least beforehand, they would talk about the stuff that was going on in the Thieves Guild in front of her, but now she would be lucky if they even mentioned that there was a guild in her presence. She knew Vi and Felicia were probably just trying to cut her some slack. Either that or they were still pissed off at her for essentially causing this whole mess. But either way, it meant one thing. She was more out of the loop than she ever had been before. Her family was a family of thieves, and being kept out of the loop like this meant that she was more alone at home now than she ever was, no matter how nice they were being to her. So, at the very least, it was nice to be around people who she was sure at least weren't hiding as much from her. Sure, Ekko hesitated around Powder at first, but soon it was like nothing had even happened in the first place, and they just started hanging out, joking around. Powder even joked that it looked like Peter and Ekko hadn't slept for a week. Ekko even said the same thing about her, and they just laughed together. It was really nice. How Powder noticed that Peter looked extremely distracted. The weight that fell off of him when he found out that Harry was okay fell right back on. Nobody could really keep their eyes on the moment, could they? Hey, Pete, you okay? Yeah, it's nothing, Peter responded, his eyes moving down to his phone. He saw that it was a text from May, but that was all she could see. What could Peter's aunt have to say right now, and why would it put Peter in such a weird mood? Peter, who actually did know, wasn't thrilled about it, stared at the notification. He knew that the hospital bill wasn't going to put strain on his family. Harry's dad made sure of that. But it wasn't like they didn't have bills beforehand, and the fact that Peter just basically was in a coma for a few days meant that his aunt and uncle weren't going to their jobs. They had spent that whole time looking after him. He didn't think that was such a big deal, but apparently he was wrong. His uncle must have worked himself to death trying to make up for the small amount of time that he missed at work. So much so that Ben had apparently passed out when he got home. May was texting him now because she wanted to make sure that Peter was coming straight home to help take care of him. Peter bit his cheek. This was such crap. He only missed work for a few days, so why was he doing this? Were they not telling him something? Did his family need more money than he thought? He felt his heart thump faster and faster in his chest as he scratched at his head. He was only snapped out of it by Ekko rocking him back and forth, making him snap back into the moment. Peter forced his eyes to blink, the sight of his friends filling them. I have to go, guys, he said, dashing out of the school. His feet hit the pavement of the outdoors and he disappeared within a matter of minutes. Powder just watched him leave, a very similar feeling filling her chest, a feeling that she had before, that something had gone bad. And if it was because of the accident that she caused, then... She felt Ekko's hand grab hers. What, we're not just gonna let him go off by himself, are we? He asked with a smile on his face. She found the fact that he had the ability to smile right now pretty impressive itself. It felt pretty impossible for her to do the same right now, but it was nice to have somebody to keep her grounded. She nodded at Ekko as the two ran outdoors, trying to follow Peter's path down the alleyways. They lost track of him pretty quickly, though, after he jumped the first fence. The leap he had pulled off was something that they had only seen gymnasts do. Thankfully, they knew where his house was, but still. Since when's Pete this athletic? He gets winded walking to science, Ekko said, turning around and running towards Peter's house. I looked down at her phone. She had a message from Powder, one that made her stomach start to sink right now. I don't think we have to pick her up today, he said absent-mindedly. What? Why? She heard a voice from before her. Something's going on. Something with Peter, Vi responded. You don't say. Which one's Peter again? Felicia asked, Vi rolling her eyes in response. Come on, you know I'm kidding. Did she say what it was? She said, walking beside her sister. Thankfully, the crowds of people on the New York streets were thinning out. Although, considering where they were heading, that could be seen as a bad thing. Something going on with his uncle, I guess. She wasn't super detailed when she sent it to me. Vi responded, taking a deep breath in, and clutched her hand to her bag more unconsciously. The hand she gripped on her bag got tighter and tighter with each passing second. Felicia put a hand on her sister's shoulder. Max, whatever it is, I'm sure they'll all be fine. After all, Powder has her best friends with her, right? Felicia gave her sister a look that told her in no uncertain terms that everything was going to be okay. Something that told her right now in the moment that things were going to be fine, and she probably wasn't just talking about the situation with Powder. Although Vi appreciated the sentiment, she didn't exactly agree with it. It especially didn't help that she wasn't the one giving it. Prided herself on being the rock of her family, and she definitely didn't feel like it right now. But a small moment of vulnerability couldn't hurt. Yeah, you're right. Those two idiots are the perfect shield for her, aren't they? Vi said. Yep, sure are, Felicia replied, as the two of them stopped in front of what looked to be a regular New York street building. So regular, in fact, that the few people who were still passing by them hadn't even glanced up to look at it. For half a second, Felicia wondered if she was in the right place, but she pushed that thought aside fairly quickly. Of course, the headquarters of the New York Thieves Guild would look normal. After all, thieves tended to hide in plain sight. It would be weirder if it didn't. If you met a good thief, you wouldn't know that you had met them until you already realized that half of your belongings were stolen. It was the same here. You should be able to walk by the Thieves Guild while being none the wiser. It was only when you were staring the door down, knowing exactly what this place was, that you felt a sense of danger and trouble. That you felt the sense of intimidation weighing down on you, bearing upon your head. It was a feeling that, when Vi thought about it, her father must have had 1,000 times over. And unfortunately, it was one that he had passed down to them with his passing. It was just about the only inheritance that they had gotten these days. Way to go, Pops, Vi muttered to herself as she stared at the building ahead. He left them. He left them with their home, he left them, or rather Felicia, with his name, and he had left them with his debt. Left them with a meeting that neither of them wanted to go to. The fact that the girls had managed to prevail on the job this time, especially without the original legendary Black Cat, was nothing short of a miracle. And given how unlucky their family was known to be, they were bound to run out of miracles sooner or later. Come on, don't get your head in a twist, we're gonna be fine. Felicia smiled as she unfurled Vi's bag, revealing the top cap of the Oscorp sludge container. We did everything they asked, right? And nobody got hurt. Permanently. Yeah, I guess that's true. Vi forced herself calm as the two of them ascended the stairs together. She tried to force her mind still as she straightened her back, ready to meet whatever was on the other side of the door. Hey everybody, I'm back at the end of the video. This episode was a little bit slower than I initially intended, and that's largely due to the nature of both Spider-Man and Arcane. There's a lot of setup to do before we get into the action and people get into their powers and whatnot. Personally, it's set up that I'm perfectly happy to do, and I really hope that you guys are okay with it too. I was really happy with the character introductions that I was able to get done, so that was really cool. I'm looking forward to diving into more about this universe's version of Jace Tallis, Oscorp scientist, and I really hope I gave people something to chew on. This video, in a couple of ways, has been a long time in the making, especially because the last part of Arcane Fantasy was published pretty much 3 months ago, which actually makes it one of my earlier videos. Because I'm planning on hopefully being able to do more frequent uploads, I hope to come back to this series a bit more quickly this time. I just want to say one last time, thank you guys so much for being here. You guys choosing to spend any of your time over here is honestly amazing, and I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to leave a like, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future installments of this or any of my other series. Next time around, we're stopping in to check in on Goku and a young Superman in the next part of Dragon Ball. In the meantime, I've been your captain, and it's been a pleasure to take you on another tour of the strongest Earth in the multiverse. Bye now!